She's not your real grandma. I overheard my daughter-in-law snapping at my grandson during our family trip. I smiled quietly. I had been waiting for this moment. At dinner, I revealed the rightful heirs to my secret $50 million fortune. She fainted after hearing what came next. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has traveled. My name is Lorna, and at 70 years old, I believed I had faced every possible humiliation life could throw at me. I was wrong. She's not your real grandmother. Those words cut through the warm evening air like a knife, deeper than any wound ever could. I was sitting on the porch of our rented cabin, watching my 8-year-old grandson, Lance, playing with his toy cars when my daughter-in-law Lyra's sharp voice shattered the quiet moment. Lance looked up, confusion clouding his innocent face. What do you mean, Mom? Lyra stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, perfectly manicured nails flashing. That familiar sneer was carved into her expression. She'd been drinking wine all afternoon, and the alcohol had loosened her tongue in ways that usually took more planning. I mean, she's just your father's mother, sweetie. Not really family like us. She's only here because we have to take care of her. Her casual cruelty squeezed my chest tight. But instead of tears, a different feeling washed over me. Relief. After 3 years of quiet observation, of playing the part of the burdened elder, of letting myself be treated like a nuisance, I finally had the confirmation I'd been waiting for. I smiled. Not the forced polite smile I'd perfected after decades of awkward family encounters, but a genuine knowing smile, coming from deep inside, from the place where I'd stored every insult, every dismissive glance, every moment of exclusion. Lorna, why are you smiling like that? Kent, my son, appeared behind Lyra, his voice heavy with the tired frustration I knew too well. Lyra didn't mean anything by it. She's just worn out from the drive. Of course, he defended her. He always did. Even when she made me sleep on the pull-out couch during visits because the guest room had to be nice for real guests. Even when she served me dinner on paper plates while everyone else ate from her precious china. Even when she made snide remarks about people who never learned to contribute properly at family gatherings. Oh, I understand exactly what Lyra meant, I said quietly, steady despite the turmoil inside. Lance abandoned his cars and climbed into my lap, his small arms wrapping around my neck with the pure, unconscious love only a child can give. You're my real grandma, Nana. I don't care what Mom says. His innocent love almost broke my resolve. Almost. But then I caught Lyra's eye roll, a clear message that even this sweet gesture was somehow wrong in her view. Lance, come inside and wash up for dinner, she ordered sharply. And don't get your clothes dirty sitting on that old couch. The old couch. The very couch I'd been relegated to during our entire 3-day vacation while Lyra and Kent enjoyed the master bedroom, and Lance had his own room. The pull-out mattress was lumpy and uncomfortable, but I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that complaints only gave Lyra more ammunition. As Lance reluctantly climbed down and trudged inside, I stayed on the porch, watching the sun slip behind the mountains. The cabin had been my idea, and my payment, although everyone assumed Kent was footing the bill, just like they assumed he'd been supporting me financially all these years since Henry died and left me with nothing. The irony tasted sweet. Inside, I could hear Lyra's voice drifting through the thin walls, no doubt continuing her rant about the burden of an aging mother-in-law. I'd heard variations of this speech 1,000 times. How hard it is to care for elderly relatives. How some people never learn to be independent. How tragic it is when family members become a financial drain. What Lyra didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every word, every slight, every deliberate humiliation had been carefully documented and stored away. Not for revenge exactly, but for clarity. I needed absolute certainty about who my son had become and what kind of people were shaping my grandson's understanding of family. The test had been running for 3 years. And tonight, with 8 simple words, Lyra gave me the final piece of the puzzle. My phone buzzed with a message from my lawyer, Richard Morrison, checking in as planned. All preparations complete. Ready to proceed? I typed back quickly. Tomorrow evening, at dinner. Have everything ready. The plan I'd been building for months was finally ready to unfold. But first, I had to survive one more night of being treated like an unwanted guest on what was supposed to be a family vacation. Through the screen door, I could hear Kent laying out the table while Lyra grumbled about having to cook for so many people, as if feeding four was some Herculean task. Lance was animatedly chatting about something he'd seen on TV, his voice light and innocent, completely unaware of the simmering resentment swirling around him. I rose slowly, my 70-year-old joints protesting after sitting too long in one spot. Playing the role of a poor, dependent widow for the past 3 years had demanded more acting skill than I ever expected. Tomorrow, that act would finally be over. Lorna, dinner. Lyra's voice pierced through my thoughts, her tone implying I was already late even though she hadn't called before. I went inside and took my usual seat at the small table. Lyra had cooked spaghetti, heaping generous portions onto her plate and Kent's, while giving Lance a child's serving, and placing a noticeably smaller amount on mine. "There's more if you want," she said with fake sweetness, but we both knew what she really meant. Old people don't need much food anyway. Kent was absorbed in his phone, probably catching up on work emails despite being on vacation. He'd inherited his father's skill for avoiding family conflicts by pretending they didn't exist. Henry had done the same whenever his sister visited and sneered at my background. Some habits, I thought bitterly, are passed down through generations. "So, Nana," Lance said, twirling spaghetti around his fork with the focus only a child can have, "Mom says we might not visit you as much anymore because it's too expensive to drive to your apartment." Kent tensed beside me and finally looked up from his phone. Lyra's face flushed slightly, clearly caught off guard by her son's innocent reveal of adult conversations. "Well," I said gently, "sometimes things change, sweetheart. People make choices based on what they think is best." What I didn't say was that after tomorrow, visits wouldn't even matter. Everything was about to change. Everything would finally be out in the open. The rest of the dinner passed quietly, broken only by Lance's occasional remarks about his toys or questions about when we'd go hiking to the lake. I answered him, smiling at his stories, treasuring each moment as though it might be our last family meal for a long time. As Lyra cleared the dishes, making a show of stacking mine loudly as if the extra effort was a punishment, I quietly excused myself and stepped out onto the porch. The mountain air was cool now, scented with pine and the promise of rain. Tomorrow night, everything would change. The masks would come off, and my family would finally see who they'd been dismissing for 3 years. I thought of the $50 million carefully held in investments, the real estate, the portfolio steadily growing while I'd played the part of the impoverished widow. But mostly, I thought about Lance, and the lesson he was about to learn about assumptions, respect, and what family truly means. A smile returned as I settled into the old porch chair. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The morning after Lyra's declaration, I woke on that lumpy pull-out couch, my back aching in protest but my mind razor-sharp. As the family stirred in their comfortable beds, I reflected on how I had reached this point. 3 years ago, when Henry died, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of revealing the full extent of our wealth, I chose to hide it, to test, to watch, to see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing left but need. Henry and I had managed our money carefully for 50 years. While he worked his modest job at the electronics plant, I quietly built an investment portfolio that would astonish anyone who knew us. We lived simply, small house, old cars, clipping coupons, not because we had to, but because we understood that true wealth grows quietly. When the plant shut down and Henry took early retirement, I was already managing nearly $20 million in diverse investments. The inheritance from my aunt's estate, never mentioned to a soul, had been the foundation. Then came the real estate, the tech stocks I'd bought before anyone else saw their potential, the small businesses I funded and nurtured. By the time Henry passed, our net worth was $50 million. But instead of telling Kent and his family, I watched how he reacted to the impoverished mother he thought I was. The results were devastating. "Mom, we need to talk about your situation," Kent said 2 weeks after the funeral, sitting in my kitchen with Lyra beside him, her face barely hiding impatience. "My situation?" I asked, though I knew what was coming. "Your financial situation?" Lyra added, her voice taking that sharp tone reserved for unpleasant realities. "Kent says," she continued, "Dad didn't leave much, and you can't afford to keep this house." Silence filled the room as I watched my son avoid my eyes while his wife laid out their version of my future. "We've been thinking," Lyra said, "maybe it's best if you move to a senior community. There's a nice one about 40 minutes away. Very affordable. You could make friends your own age." Affordable. Translation: cheap enough that we won't feel guilty about putting you there. "And the house?" I asked quietly. Kent finally looked at me then, uncomfortable but resolute. "We think you should sell it. Use the money for living expenses." What he meant was, sell the house, support yourself, and don't expect help from us. I had raised this man, sacrificed for him, worked extra shifts so he could have school clothes and baseball gear. And now, with his father barely cold in the ground, he was telling me I was a financial burden he no longer wanted. The test began that very day. Instead of revealing the truth, I played along. I sold the house just as they suggested. What they didn't realize was that I already owned the building where I moved. The rental apartment I now called home was actually mine, but I let them believe I was struggling to cover the monthly rent. "It's so expensive," I'd told Kent during one of his increasingly rare calls. "But I guess I'll manage somehow." The effect was immediate. His calls grew shorter and less frequent. Lyra stopped inviting me to family events, claiming they didn't want to burden me with the cost of potluck contributions. Holiday invites became rare, and when they arrived, they carried thinly veiled hints to keep gifts modest and affordable. I had perfected the role, rotating the same 3 outfits, buying generic groceries when they visited, apologizing for not being able to contribute more to Lance's birthday gifts, all while my investment accounts quietly flourished and my real estate holdings expanded. The hardest part wasn't their rejection of my supposed poverty. It was how quickly they accepted it. No one questioned whether I needed help. No one offered assistance for my financial difficulties. They simply dismissed me as a problem solved by distance and diminished expectations. Lyra, in particular, embraced my new status with a zeal that bordered on cruelty. During family visits, she made pointed remarks about how some people needed to learn to live within their means. She suggested I shop at thrift stores, pretending it was helpful advice rather than condescension. She even offered to teach me how to use coupons more efficiently, apparently unaware I'd been clipping coupons long before she was born. But the deepest wound was how she handled Lance's relationship with me. Slowly, methodically, she taught my grandson that I was less important than other family members, that my presence was tolerated, not cherished, that love and respect came tied to financial contribution. "Nana can't come to your school play, honey," I overheard her tell Lance once. "She can't afford the gas money, and it would be awkward to ask." I could have easily flown out to see his play and stayed overnight in a hotel. Instead, I missed it, watching my grandson learn that money dictated family priorities. Lyra's true mastery was how she framed it all as protection. She was protecting me, from embarrassment, from feeling inadequate, from the stress of trying to keep up with their lifestyle. But in reality, she was erasing me from Lance's life while appearing compassionate to outsiders. Kent, for his part, just let it happen. When I tried to raise concerns about Lance drifting away during our last phone call, he brushed me off. "He's busy with school and friends," he said. "Mom, kids that age don't really want to hang out with grandparents. It's normal." Normal. As if the slow breaking of a family bond was just natural growth, not deliberate manipulation. But through it all, I watched and learned. I saw who they really were when they thought no one important was watching. I kept track of every slight, every dismissive remark, every moment they chose convenience over care. Yesterday, when Lyra told Lance I wasn't his real grandmother, she gave me the final piece of proof. Not just that she disrespected me, but that she was actively poisoning my relationship with my grandson. Now, lying on this uncomfortable couch while my family slept soundly in their cozy beds, I felt something I hadn't in 3 years. Anticipation. Tonight, at dinner, the act would end, the masks would come off, and the truth would be revealed. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my investment accounts to check the morning numbers. 52 million now, thanks to some smart moves in renewable energy. More than enough to secure Lance's future, no matter how poorly his parents planned financially, and enough to rewrite the family's rules completely. From the kitchen, I heard Lyra start the coffee, probably wondering why the old woman was still on the couch, not up and doing something useful. Little did she know that in less than 24 hours, she'd be the one questioning her place in this family. The thought made me smile as I finally pushed myself upright, ready to endure one more day of being treated like a burden I was about to prove I never truly was. The morning passed in the usual family vacation rhythm. Kent buried himself in work emails, all while pretending to relax. Lyra spent an hour preparing to hike a 1-mile trail. And Lance bounced between boredom and bursts of energy. I played my role, volunteering to clear away breakfast while apologizing for being a bit slow. But something about me was different, and I could tell Lyra was starting to notice. "You seem pretty energetic today," she remarked, watching me scrub the dishes with more speed and focus than usual. Her voice carried that familiar skepticism she reserved for anything that didn't fit her expectations. "I slept better than I thought I would," I answered honestly. That awful mattress actually felt like a luxury compared to the weight I've been carrying these past 3 years. Knowing the charade would finally end tonight gave me a lightness I haven't felt since Henry's funeral. When we finally set off on the hike to the lake, I surprised everyone by keeping up easily. For 3 years, I'd played the part of a frail old woman who needed constant breaks and careful help. Today, I walked with the steady confidence of someone who'd been nurturing her health precisely for moments like this. "Nana, you're walking really fast," Lance called out, his short legs working hard to match my suddenly brisk pace. "I'm feeling good today, sweetheart," I told him, bending down to squeeze his hand. Sometimes we surprise ourselves with what we're capable of. Kent glanced back from up ahead, confusion flickering across his face. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You seem different." Different. If only he knew just how different everything was about to become. The lake was stunning, framed by towering pines and sparkling in the morning sun like scattered diamonds. Lance immediately began gathering interesting rocks. Meanwhile, Kent and Lyra unpacked their elaborate picnic setup, a full cooler, folding chairs, even a small speaker for music. I'd been given a single water bottle and a granola bar, as if my needs were naturally minimal. I found myself watching them with fresh clarity, like an anthropologist studying curious but unfamiliar creatures. Kent sat in his pricey camping chair, his attention split between his phone and nervous glances in my direction. He'd inherited his father's height and my stubborn chin, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost the kindness I remembered from his childhood. When had he become someone who could so easily dismiss his own mother's well-being? When did family loyalty start being measured in dollars and convenience? Lyra, on the other hand, was exactly who I'd always known her to be. I'd just been too hopeful to see it clearly before. She reclined in her chair like a queen on her throne, occasionally telling Lance to stay away from the water's edge but making no real effort to watch him herself. Every few minutes, she snapped a selfie, carefully angling the camera to capture the beautiful scenery while making sure I wasn't in the frame. "Lance, come take a picture with Mommy and Daddy," she called, patting her lap with perfectly manicured nails. As they posed for their flawless family photo, it struck me that I'd never been included in a single one of their vacation pictures. For 3 years, I'd been the invisible woman, there, but not important enough to be remembered. Future generations flipping through their albums wouldn't even know I'd been on these trips. The thought should have stung, but instead, it made me smile. By tomorrow, they'd be scrambling to prove they'd always valued me. "Nana, want to see my rock collection?" Lance had abandoned the photo shoot and come back to my side, his small hands holding several smooth stones. They're beautiful, I said, genuinely interested as I examined each one. You have great taste in rocks. He grinned and settled beside me on a fallen log where I'd chosen to sit rather than take one of their fancy chairs. For the next hour, we built intricate rock castles and made up stories about the fish swimming in the clear water. This was what I'd missed most during the 3 years of careful distance Lyra had orchestrated, not the big family parties or holidays, but these simple moments of connection with my grandson. These were the memories that should have come naturally and often, not parceled out like precious commodities. Lance seems really attached to you, Kent observed at last, putting his phone away and actually paying attention to the family. We understand each other, I replied, helping Lance balance a tricky rock atop our castle. That's sweet, Lyra said, though her tone made it clear she thought otherwise. But I hope he's not becoming too dependent. Kids need to learn that people can't always be there for them. The casual harshness of her comment, spoken with Lance just steps away, made my jaw tighten. She was already preparing him for my inevitable absence, quietly laying the groundwork to erase me from his life completely. Family is supposed to be dependable, I said softly, locking eyes with her. That's what family means. Something in my voice seemed to catch her off guard because her expression immediately hardened. Well, yes, but only to a point, she replied coolly. People have to be realistic about what others can actually offer. Absolutely, I agreed, smiling in a way that made her frown. People should definitely be realistic about what others can give. The conversation shifted, but I could feel Lyra watching me more closely for the rest of the afternoon. Her instinct sensed a change, even if she couldn't quite place it. As we packed up to head back to the cabin, I made my next calculated move. I've been thinking, I announced, lifting my small backpack with surprising energy. We should have a proper family dinner tonight. Mom, we already planned to order pizza, Kent said, sounding worn out from the hike. It's easier. Oh, but I insist, I said brightly. I want to cook for everyone. It's the least I can do after you all have been so kind including me on this trip. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She was used to my usual humble thanks, but now there was something different in my tone, almost a challenge. You don't have to go to all that trouble, she said cautiously. Besides, the cabin kitchen is small. Not really set up for anything fancy. I'll manage, I assured her. I'm more resourceful than most people give me credit for. That evening, standing in the cramped kitchen preparing what would be our final meal as a family united by deception, I felt a strange mix of sadness and anticipation. I was about to shatter the illusion of family harmony that Kent and Lyra had built around convenience. But I was also about to set us all free from the lies we'd been living. Smells good in here, Kent said, wandering in as I put the last touches on a meal far beyond their expectations. I'd driven to the upscale market earlier and bought ingredients reflecting my true budget, not the limitations I'd pretended to have. Found some excellent steaks on sale, I lied smoothly. Thought we deserved something special for our last night together. Later, Lyra appeared at the doorway, her voice sharp with suspicion. Of our vacation, I clarified, though we both knew what I really meant. As I called everyone to dinner, I felt the weight of 3 years of careful watching settling into place. Tonight, the act would end, the truth would surface, and my family would finally see exactly who they'd been dismissing. I glanced around the small cabin one last time, memorizing this moment before everything changed. By tomorrow, they'd understand that assumptions about power, money, and family loyalty could be dangerously wrong. The table was set, the food was ready, and Richard Morrison was on standby with all the legal papers that would redefine our family's future. When I called Lance to wash up for dinner, I smiled with genuine anticipation. It was time for the real conversation to begin. The dinner I prepared was worthy of a fine restaurant, prime ribeye steaks, roasted vegetables seasoned with herbs I'd grown before moving into my poverty apartment, and a chocolate dessert that cost more than Lyra usually spent on groceries in a week. I watched their faces as they tasted the first bites, surprise and confusion replacing the usual patronizing acceptance of my simple meals. This is incredible, Mom, Kent said, cutting into his steak appreciatively. When did you learn to cook like this? I've always cooked like this, I answered honestly. You just never paid attention. Lance devoured his child-sized portion with enthusiasm, chattering about how it was the best dinner ever. Lyra ate more slowly, her expression growing more suspicious as she processed the quality and clear expense of the meal. Where did you get these steaks? She finally asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. They must have been pricey. Found them on sale, I repeated my earlier lie, meeting her gaze steadily. Sometimes you get lucky. Lucky, she echoed, clearly unconvinced. I set down my fork and reached for the wine I'd opened earlier, another expensive choice she'd noticed. The cheap boxed wine I usually brought to family dinners was nowhere to be seen tonight. Actually, I said, feeling the moment crystallize around us. I think it's time we had a conversation about luck, money, and honesty. Kent paused mid-bite, something in my tone signaling this wouldn't be an ordinary family dinner talk. Lyra's grip tightened on her wine glass, her instincts clearly on high alert, though she hadn't yet figured out why. What do you mean, Nana? Lance asked innocently, looking up from his steak with trusting eyes. I mean, sweetheart, that sometimes adults don't share the full truth with each other, and sometimes that causes trouble. Mom, Kent said carefully, setting down his fork and knife. What exactly are you trying to say? I took a slow sip of wine, savoring both the rich vintage and the moment I had been waiting for these past 3 years. I'm saying you've all been operating under some serious misunderstandings about my situation. Your situation? Lyra's voice rose a half step, the way it always did when she sensed a threat to her carefully controlled world. My financial situation, specifically. I smiled at her, enjoying the way her face began to lose color. You see, when Henry passed, you all made assumptions about what he left behind, what I had to live on, and what kind of future I faced. Kent was staring at me now, his dinner forgotten. Mom, what are you trying to say? Are you? I'm saying your father and I handled money much better than any of you realized. I pulled a tablet from my purse and opened it to the summary page of my investment portfolio. Much, much better. The screen displayed a number that made Kent's mouth drop open. 523,891, I said. That's impossible, Lyra whispered, leaning forward as if the numbers might disappear like a magic trick. The investments are real, I said calmly. The real estate holdings are real. The trust funds are real. The only thing that wasn't real was the poverty I've been pretending for the past 3 years. Kent's chair scraped the floor as he pushed back abruptly. Pretending? Mom? What on earth are you talking about? I'm talking about a test, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. A 3-year test to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer but need. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear Lance's breath, the tick of the clock, the distant rustling of pine needles in the wind. Inside the cabin, 3 people were struggling to process the complete upheaval of everything they believed about our family. Lyra was the first to break. You're lying, she said, her voice shrill with panic. This has to be some kind of joke. Some sick joke. No joke, I assured her, scrolling through the account pages to reveal the real estate, stocks, and municipal bonds. Though, I suppose there's a certain irony in you calling something cruel. But the apartment, Kent stammered. The constant money worries. The way you. The way I what? I asked sharply. The way I accepted being treated like a burden. The way I let myself be excluded from family events because supposedly I couldn't contribute. The way I sat silently while Lyra told my grandson I wasn't really part of the family. Kent's face went pale. He glanced at Lyra, who was now openly staring at the screen as if willing the numbers to vanish by sheer force of will. You've been testing us, he said slowly, realization dawning in his voice. For 3 years, you've been testing us. And you failed, I said simply. Spectacularly. Lyra suddenly stood, her chair crashing backward with a loud bang. This is madness. You can't just lie to your family for 3 years and then act like we're the bad guys. Can I? I asked, staying seated as she towered over the table. Because from where I'm sitting, I simply let you show who you really are when there was nothing in it for you. We took care of you, she shouted, her composure shattering. We included you on trips. We called. We visited. You warehoused me, I corrected firmly. You managed me like an unpleasant task. You systematically shut me out of meaningful family moments while congratulating yourselves on doing the bare minimum. Lance looked back and forth between us with growing alarm. Why is everyone yelling? Nana, why is Mom so upset? I reached over and took his small hand gently. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements about important things, sweetheart. But don't worry, everything will be okay. Everything is not going to be okay, Lyra's voice cracked with hysteria. You've been lying to us. Manipulating us. I've been watching you, I said coldly. What I noticed was this: when you believed I was poor and dependent, you couldn't get rid of me fast enough. You treated me like a burden, shut me out of family decisions, and worst of all, you began teaching Lance that love was conditional, based on what someone could give. Kent finally found his voice. Mom, if you had just told us. I cut him off. Told you what? That I had money? And then what? You would have suddenly remembered how to treat me with respect? You'd have magically started feeling affection again? You would have stopped letting your wife poison my grandson against me. The word poison hit Lyra like a slap. She staggered back, reaching for the wall to steady herself. That's not, I never, she began, but the words caught in her throat as she realized there was no defense. Yesterday, I pressed on without mercy. When you told Lance I wasn't his real grandmother, you confirmed everything I'd suspected about your character. You're not just someone who judges people based on what you think they're worth, you actively work to destroy relationships that don't serve your agenda. Lyra's breathing grew rapid and shallow. Her face shifted from pale to flushed as the full weight of what I'd said settled in. I think I'm going to be sick. And then, as if the universe had scripted perfect punctuation to my revelation, she did something I never expected but would never forget: she fainted. Lyra collapsed to the floor like a marionette with cut strings, her body hitting the wooden floor with a dull thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Kent immediately knelt beside his wife, while Lance stared wide-eyed, shocked. Mom, Lyra, can you hear me? I stayed seated at the table, calmly finishing my wine while my daughter-in-law lay unconscious on the floor. After 3 years of orchestrated humiliation, all I felt was satisfaction watching her carefully crafted world unravel. Is she going to be okay? Lance asked quietly, scared. She'll be fine, I told him. Honestly, I didn't care much either way. Sometimes people break down when they finally face their mistakes. Kent looked up at me from where he knelt beside Lyra. His expression was a mix of shock, anger, and something that might have been the first flicker of understanding. What happens now? He asked softly. I smiled, lifting my glass for another sip of my fine wine. Now? Now we have an honest conversation about the future, once your wife wakes up. The test was over. The results were clear. And the real talk about our family's future was just beginning. 10 minutes later, Lyra stirred awake. Her eyes fluttered open to find Kent hovering with a damp towel and Lance peering anxiously around his father's shoulder. I had moved to the living room, giving them space while keeping my calm, steady presence. What happened? She mumbled, trying to sit up before the memory crashed down. Her gaze locked on me across the room. I watched hope drain from her face as she realized it wasn't a nightmare. You fainted, Kent said gently, helping her sit against the kitchen cabinets. When Mom showed us. When she told us about the money, Lyra finished flatly, voice hollow. She really has $50 million. $52 million, I corrected from my spot on the couch. The precision hit her like another blow. This wasn't vague family wealth or complicated trusts. This was accessible, liquid wealth I'd quietly held while they treated me like charity. Kent helped Lyra to her feet and guided her to a kitchen chair. Lance had retreated to his toy cars, sensing the tension but not its cause. Watching my grandson play quietly while his world shifted tightened my chest with fierce protectiveness. "I need to understand," Kent said, settling across from Lyra, eyes fixed on me. "You've had this money for 3 years. You watched us struggle with decisions about your care, about including you, about—" He stopped, the full weight of my deception dawning on him. "You let us think you were poor. I let you show who you really are," I said firmly. "I didn't force you to treat me poorly, Kent. I simply gave you the chance to reveal your true selves when you thought there would be no consequences." Lyra's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "But why? Why would you do this to us?" Her confusion was so genuine I almost felt pity. "Almost. Because I needed to know," I said plainly. "When Henry died, I realized I didn't really know my own family anymore. I needed to see who you had become, who you married, and most importantly, what kind of people were shaping my grandson's idea of family loyalty." "So, you lied to us for 3 years," Kent said, voice tight with anger held in check. "You manipulated us, tested us, set us up to fail." "I watched," I replied coldly. "Everything you did, every choice you made, every way you treated me was entirely your own. I just didn't correct your mistaken assumptions about my finances." Lyra leaned forward suddenly, eyes sharp with desperate hope. "But now that we know, we can change everything. We can start fresh. We can know." I cut her off firmly. "We can't start over. You can't unsee who you truly are. And I can't forget what I've learned about both of you." The finality in my voice drained the last bit of color from her face. "What does that mean?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, placing it squarely on the coffee table for them all to see. "It means I've made decisions about the future, my will, my assets, and my relationship with this family." Kent's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Mom, whatever you're thinking." "I've already done it," I said. I unfolded the envelope and withdrew the first document, a revised will my attorney had drafted precisely to my instructions. My estate would be held in trust for Lance until his 25th birthday. The trustees would be my lawyer and a financial management firm, no family members involved. Lyra let out a breathy sound, like the air escaping a deflating balloon. "You're cutting us out entirely." "I'm making sure Lance has the resources he'll need for his future, regardless of his parents' financial skills or character," I said. I pulled out the second paper. "There are conditions." "Conditions?" Kent asked, tiredly. "The trust funds can only be accessed if Lance maintains a relationship with me that isn't filtered or controlled by his parents. If I discover either of you has turned him against me, kept him from seeing me, or damaged our bond in any way, the money goes to charity instead." The silence that followed was so thick I could hear Lance's toy cars rolling across the wooden floor in the next room. "You can't do that," Lyra whispered, though her voice betrayed her awareness that I absolutely could. "I can, and I have," I confirmed. "Also, I've created a separate fund for Lance's education, healthcare, and general needs. It will be managed independently, without your access, but also without you being financially responsible for major expenses." Kent stared at the papers like they were written in an alien language. "So basically, you're bribing us to let you have a relationship with Lance." "I'm protecting myself and my grandson from your proven tendency to cut people out of family when it suits you," I said sharply. "You spent 3 years systematically diminishing my role in Lance's life. Now you'll spend the next 17 years ensuring that doesn't happen again." Lyra's breathing grew shallow once more, and I half expected her to faint again. "This is blackmail." "No," I said firmly. "This is accountability. For 3 years, you operated on the assumption that I had no power, no resources, and no options. You were wrong on all counts." I pulled out the third document, the one I knew would hurt Kent the most. "I've also made some decisions about more immediate arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" His tone said he didn't really want to hear the answer. I'm moving. The apartment I've been renting is actually a property I own, but it was never meant to be permanent. I bought a house about 2 hours away. Close enough for regular visits with Lance, but far enough to maintain my independence. 2 hours? Kent's voice cracked. Mom, that's far enough that you'll have to make a real effort if you want to see me. I finished. No more obligatory dinners where I'm treated like an unwelcome guest. No more family vacations where I sleep on pull-out couches and pretend I'm grateful. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to earn it. Lyra finally spoke, though her voice sounded distant. What if we don't accept your conditions? I smiled, cold and without warmth. Then Lance still inherits everything when he turns 25, but you'll spend nearly 2 decades knowing your treatment of his grandmother cost this family $52 million. The weight of that hung over them like a lead blanket. I could almost see their minds racing, scrambling to find some loophole or angle to salvage the situation. You said you wanted to protect Lance from learning that love is conditional? Kent asked desperately. But isn't that exactly what you're doing? What? Making my love conditional on how you treat me? No, I replied calmly. I'm making my money conditional on how you treat me. My love for Lance has never faltered despite your best efforts to damage our relationship. But my willingness to financially support people who've shown contempt for me, that ship has sailed. I stood, smoothing my dress, ready to deliver the final blow. You have a choice. Accept these new terms and rebuild our family on genuine respect, or reject them and explain to Lance someday why his college fund went to charity instead of his future. Lyra was openly crying now, tears streaming down her face as the full weight of her mistake settled in. We didn't know, she sobbed. If you'd known about the money, you would have treated me well, but for all the wrong reasons. I finished speaking. You would have been kind to me because I was useful, not because I was family. That's not love, Lyra. That's manipulation. Kent held his head in his hands, the full weight of their reality finally settling in, 3 years of dismissing his mother, allowing his wife to systematically shut her out of family life, treating her like an inconvenience instead of someone to be cherished. What do you want from us? He asked at last, his voice muffled behind his palms. I want you to choose who you want to be, I said simply. You can be the kind of people who love family unconditionally, no matter financial status. Or you can be the kind who measure relationships by profit and gain, but you can't be both. And you can't pretend the last 3 years never happened. I walked over to the window and gazed out at the lake where Lance and I had spent hours building rock castles just that morning. Tonight, you can discuss it, I said without turning around. In the morning, tell me what you've decided. Behind me, I heard Lyra's quiet sobs and Kent's soft reassurances. But I felt no pity for their pain. They'd brought this on themselves, through their choices, their assumptions, their casual cruelty. Now they would face the consequences. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed, frantic whispers from Kent and Lyra's room. They'd been awake most of the night, and snippets of conversation floated through the thin cabin walls, still searching for some way to regain control. There was none. Lance was already up, sitting at the small kitchen table with a bowl of cereal, legs swinging, humming softly to himself. He looked up as I rose from the uncomfortable couch, his smile as bright and simple as ever. Morning, Nana. Are we going home today? We are, sweetheart, I said, tousling his hair as I passed to make coffee. Are you excited to see your room again? I guess, but I liked building rock castles with you yesterday. Can we do that again sometime? His innocent question tightened my throat with emotion. I hope so, Lance. I really hope so. Kent appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed, and he moved with the cautious precision of someone barely holding it together. Mom, he said quietly. Can we talk? I glanced at Lance, still absorbed in his cereal, seemingly unaware of the adult tension surrounding him. Of course. We stepped outside onto the porch, the morning air crisp and clear, feeling almost symbolic. The mountain lake stretched out before us, calm and steady, indifferent to the turmoil unfolding in its shadow. "We want to accept your terms," Kent said without hesitation, his voice heavy with exhaustion and emotion. I studied his face, searching for genuine understanding beneath the fatigue and desperation. "All of them. Every single one." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Lyra's not happy about it, but she realizes we have no choice." "This isn't about choice, Kent," I said firmly. "It's about character. If you're only agreeing because you feel trapped, then we're not building anything real." He was silent for a long moment, staring out at the water. "When I failed you, didn't I? As a son, I completely failed you." His confession hit me harder than I expected. This was the moment I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. But instead of triumph, I felt only sorrow for what we'd lost and uncertainty if we could rebuild it. "You failed yourself," I said softly. "You became someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could watch his wife push his mother out of family life and say nothing. Someone who could hear his child being taught love was conditional and do nothing." Tears ran down his cheeks, and suddenly I saw the little boy who cried when he accidentally crushed bugs in the garden. That boy had a natural kindness buried beneath years of Lyra's influence and his own choices. "Can you forgive me?" His voice was raw with true remorse. "I can learn to forgive you," I answered carefully. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. The past 3 years happened, Kent. The way you treated me, allowed me to be treated, the damage done between me and Lance, those things are real." He nodded, accepting the weight of his actions. "What do we do now?" "Now," I said, "you prove your words mean something. Not through grand gestures or dramatic apologies, but through steady, respectful actions over time. You show me that you remember I'm your mother, not some burden to be managed." I glanced through the screen door and saw Lyra sitting at the kitchen table. Her face was swollen from crying, and she gripped a coffee mug as if it were her lifeline. She stared blankly ahead, clearly struggling to accept a reality where she no longer held all the power in family affairs. "Lyra will have to choose who she wants to be," I said honestly. "She can learn to treat me with respect, or she can keep seeing me as an obstacle to her perfect family picture. But she can't do both, and her decision will shape the kind of relationship she has with the money that will determine Lance's future." Kent flinched at the stark reminder of the financial stakes. "She's scared." "She should be," I answered without sympathy. "She spent 3 years systematically trying to erase me from my grandson's life while treating me like hired help. Fear is the natural response to realizing that actions have consequences." We stood quietly for a moment, watching Lance through the window as he finished breakfast and wandered over to the toy box in the corner of the living room. His innocence amidst our family turmoil was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "I want him to know you, Kent," he said suddenly. "The real you, not the version Lyra's been teaching him." "Then you'll have to make that happen," I told him. "No more silent acceptance when Lyra makes cutting comments about me. No more allowing her to exclude me from family decisions or gatherings. No more acting like having me around is a favor you're doing me, instead of a relationship that benefits everyone." "I understand. I hope you do," I said sincerely. "Because this is your last chance, Kent. I'm done spending years being treated like an afterthought and pretending it doesn't hurt." 6 months later, I sat in the sunroom of my new home, watching Lance help me tend the herb garden we planted together. The 2-hour drive had truly made visits require intention, which meant when they happened, the time was meaningful rather than obligatory. Kent came every other weekend, sometimes with Lyra, sometimes alone when she was too busy to come along. I suspected his solo visits were his way of rebuilding our relationship without his wife's resentment complicating things, and I appreciated the effort. Lyra's adjustment to this new dynamic had been painful to witness but necessary. She'd tried sullen compliance, forced enthusiasm, strategic absences, before settling into a pattern of cautious politeness that felt sustainable if not warm. "She'll never like me," I told Kent once during one of his solo visits. "Probably not," he admitted honestly. But she's learning to respect you. That might be enough. And it was enough, I decided. I didn't want fake friendship or forced affection. I wanted my place in the family recognized and treated with the respect I deserved as Lance's grandmother and Kent's mother. Lyra could give that without liking me, and I could accept it without trusting her. The real victory was Lance, free from his mother's subtle poison. Our relationship had blossomed into something deeper and more genuine than I dared hope. He spent every other weekend with me, learning my recipes, helping in the garden, and absorbing stories about his grandfather and the family history Lyra never cared to ask about. "Nana," he said one day, carefully transplanting a basil seedling. "Mom says you're really rich. Is that true?" I smiled at his bluntness. 8-year-olds have no patience for euphemisms. "I am, sweetheart. Does that change anything between us?" He thought seriously, the way he did with every important question. "No, I don't think so. You're still the same person who builds rock castles and makes the best pancakes. Money doesn't change that." "Right." I agreed, my heart swelling with love for this wise little boy. "Money doesn't change who we are inside. It just sometimes reveals who other people really are." He nodded solemnly, then brightened with a new thought. "Does that mean I can go to college wherever I want?" "It means you'll have options," I told him. "But you still have to work hard and make good choices. Money opens doors, but you're the one who has to walk through them." That evening, after Kent picked up Lance and began the drive home, I settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea and the contentment of a day well spent. My phone buzzed with a text from Kent. "Thank you for today. Lance hasn't stopped talking about the garden." "Same time in 2 weeks," I typed back. "Drive safely." The relationship wasn't perfect. It might never be what it could have been if the last 3 years had gone differently, but it was honest, built on truth instead of assumptions, respect instead of obligation. I thought about Lyra, probably spending her evening calculating compound interest on $52 million and wondering how her life might have looked if she'd made different choices. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to exclude me from the family, she had sealed her own permanent outsider status. But mostly, I thought about Lance, and the man he would become. He would grow up knowing family relationships take effort and respect to maintain. He'd understand wealth as a tool, not a measure of worth. Most importantly, he'd know his grandmother fought to stay in his life when others tried to push her aside. The test was over. The results were final. And for the first time in 3 years, I was exactly where I belonged, in my own home, on my own terms, with my dignity intact and my future secure. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, to build the family I wanted, rather than accept the one others imposed on me. I raised my teacup in a silent toast to my 70-year-old self, the woman who learned that sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to be diminished by others' limits. The performance was over. The truth had set us all free. And I had never been happier to be exactly who I was. Now, I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you faced something similar? Share your thoughts below. Meanwhile, I'm leaving you with 2 more stories from the channel favorites, and trust me, they'll surprise you. Thank you for watching all the way through.